Get out of my car! You don't know what you're doing!
Please, just let me explain.
You dare steal from me? From me? Damian Cross's voice cracked like a whip across the marble hall, echoing through the vaulted ceilings of the penthouse. His storm-gray eyes blazed, his fist clenched at his side. The staff, frozen in the background, watched with wide eyes, terrified. Amara Daniels stood at the center of it all, her back straight, her chin lifted just enough to show she wasn't broken. Her maid's uniform clung to her from the sprint back inside, her skin glistening faintly with sweat. The keys to his Ferrari still trembled in her hand. "I didn't," she started, her voice trembling before she forced it steady. "I didn't steal it." "You drove my car out of this garage without my permission," Damian snapped, striding forward, his Italian leather shoes slamming against the marble floor. He loomed over her, tall, broad-shouldered, framed in the glow of the chandelier. "You broke into my property. You endangered my reputation. You think I'll let you explain this away with some pathetic excuse?" The word pathetic landed like a slap, but Amara didn't flinch. She folded the keys into her palm, fingers curling tight. She thought of Malik, her brother, his soft breathing in the hospital bed, his chest rising only because machines made it so. She thought of the note she had seen tucked into a guard's jacket pocket, the words scrawled in haste about the cross bastard and his red Ferrari, and, "Make sure it doesn't start tomorrow." Her lips parted, but she knew. If she revealed what she'd read, she might put herself in even more danger. If Damian didn't believe her, and why would he, he'd destroy her completely. "You'll be lucky," Damian growled, his voice low, dangerous, "if I don't have you arrested tonight." Gasps echoed from the staff behind him. A butler, old and weary, muttered a soft prayer under his breath. Amara swallowed hard. She shifted her stance, her feet aching from 12 hours of work. Her eyes, those deep amber pools that so often avoided his gaze, finally locked onto his. "If I hadn't taken it," she whispered, her voice soft but unwavering, "you wouldn't be standing here." For a flicker of a second, Damian hesitated. Something in her tone, a certainty, a warning, snagged against his fury. His jaw tightened. He turned sharply, his coat swishing behind him, and barked at the nearest guard. "Call the police!" Amara's stomach sank. She could hear her own heartbeat in her ears. The staff began to disperse, whispers curling like smoke. To them, she was a thief, a desperate maid who had touched what was not hers. She felt their eyes burn against her back. Her hand went instinctively to the pocket of her uniform where the crumpled paper still rested. The note. Proof of everything. She had planned to throw it away, to burn it before anyone found out she had seen it. But now, her life might depend on it. Damian's voice cut through again, cold and final. "By morning, you'll be gone from my house, and when the police are done, you'll wish you had never set foot in it." Amara's throat burned, but she didn't cry. She stood tall, clutching the keys, her breath steady even as the walls seemed to close in. She wasn't just fighting for herself, she was fighting for her brother, for the one fragile thread of family she had left. Outside the tall windows, New York City glowed like 1,000 beating hearts. But inside, only two of them mattered. One, hardened into stone. The other, burning with a secret she wasn't sure she'd survive long enough to reveal. And so, their war began. The next morning broke with a cruel brightness. Sunlight poured through Damian's penthouse windows, spilling across the polished glass floors and stainless steel. The city below roared awake, taxis honking, skyscrapers gleaming. But inside the Crow's residence, tension sat heavy, pressing on every breath. Amara stood in the kitchen, scrubbing a pan so hard the metal screeched. Her knuckles were raw from work. She hadn't slept. Her mind had played the scene again and again. Damian's fury, his threat, the staff's whispers. The word thief had hung in the air all night. Across the room, two housemaids whispered near the counter. They didn't bother lowering their voices. "Did you see her face?" She thought she'd get away with it. Imagine, a maid behind the wheel of a Ferrari. She's done. He'll make sure she never works again. Amara kept her back to them, jaw clenched, eyes fixed on the soapy water. She'd learned long ago that if you let the words sink in, they poisoned you. Then, the sound of heavy steps. Damian. He strode into the kitchen in a slate-gray suit, his tie perfectly knotted, hair slicked back as if the night had never touched him. But his eyes were colder than steel. "Leave us," he ordered the other maids. They scattered immediately, their shoes clicking against the tiles as they fled. Silence remained. Amara straightened slowly, wiping her damp hands on her apron. She turned, ready for the attack. "Did you sleep?" Damien asked flatly. Her lips parted, startled by the question. "No." "Good. Neither did I." He stepped closer, his gaze sharp, dissecting her. "You've made a fool of me. Do you understand that?" Amara's voice trembled, but she forced strength into it. "I wasn't trying to humiliate you." "You think anyone believes that?" Damien snapped. His voice rose, echoing against the steel appliances. "The staff whispers. The security guards laugh behind my back. The press, if they catch wind of this, do you realize what they'll do with it? Billionaire's maid steals his Ferrari. That headline alone would bury me in mockery." His words cut sharper than knives, each one laced with rage and ego. Amara's hands balled into fists at her sides. She wanted to scream at him, to tell him that while he fretted over headlines, she had been trying to stop him from being murdered in that same Ferrari. But fear sealed her lips. Instead, she said softly, "I didn't do it for me." "Then for who?" Damien stepped closer, his breath sharp with espresso and fury. He loomed over her, so near she could see the faint scar along his jawline, the one the tabloids once said came from a drunken brawl in Monaco. "You enjoyed it, didn't you? Pretending you could be something more than what you are. Behind that wheel, for just one night, you weren't a maid, you were me. Admit it." The injustice of it struck her like a slap. Her chest tightened, her breath caught. She looked up at him, eyes blazing now with something she couldn't hold back. "No," she said, her voice trembling, then stronger. "No, I didn't enjoy it. I was terrified. I was trying to save you, Damien." The words slipped out before she could stop them. Her heart thudded. Damien froze. For a moment, his mask faltered. Confusion flickered across his face. "Save me?" Amara swallowed. She lowered her gaze, clutching her apron. "Forget it. You wouldn't understand." But Damien wasn't used to being denied. His hand shot out, gripping her wrist, not harsh enough to hurt, but firm, demanding. "Explain." Amara's breath hitched. She could feel his warmth against her skin, feel the intensity of his stare. For a heartbeat, she wanted to tell him everything. About the note, the plot, the reason she risked everything. But the image of Malik's frail body hooked to machines flashed before her eyes. If she told Damien, if he didn't believe her, if he retaliated, her brother's future would collapse along with hers. So instead, she pulled her wrist free, straightened her shoulders and said, "Believe whatever you want. You already think I'm a thief. Let it stay that way." Her defy, ants, quiet but unshaken, seemed to strike him harder than if she'd screamed. His jaw tightened, his eyes darkened. For once, he had no cutting reply. Damien turned sharply on his heel, storming out, the echo of his footsteps bouncing down the hall. Amara exhaled shakily, her whole body trembling. The battle lines were drawn, and she knew this was only the beginning. The city glittered outside Damien's skyscraper as evening fell, neon and headlights flickering against the glass walls of his empire. Inside, however, tension had turned the penthouse into a cage. Amara worked silently, polishing the grand piano that none of the staff were ever allowed to touch. Her hands moved in circles, steady, but her mind was loud with thoughts. Every step Damien took around the house seemed heavier than usual, his anger coiled, waiting to strike. Tonight he wasn't alone. Several members of his inner circle had gathered for dinner, board members, lawyers, one politician whose face was familiar from the news. They sat around the long mahogany table, sipping rare wine, laughing with forced ease. Damien presided at the head, his suit jacket removed, his white shirt crisp. He looked every bit the golden tyrant, handsome, poised, and terrifying in his power. But beneath the table, his knee bounced, restless. His mind wasn't with the contracts or the politics. It was still stuck on her words. "I was trying to save you." Amara entered the dining room carrying a silver tray of roasted lamb and vegetables. The conversations faltered as she approached. She felt their eyes on her, sharp, judgmental. She set the platter down carefully, keeping her gaze low. One of the board members smirked, his voice dripping with mockery. Is this the one? Damien didn't look up from his glass of wine. The one what? The maid who tried to take your Ferrari for a midnight joyride. The man chuckled, shaking his head. Unbelievable. I thought you ran a tighter ship, Cross. The table rippled with laughter. Amara F. rose, heat rising in her chest. She kept her hands tight on the tray, afraid if she let go, they'd see her shaking. Damien's jaw twitched. His gray eyes flicked toward her, then back to his glass. She's still here because I haven't decided how badly to ruin her life yet. The laughter grew louder. Another man added, She's pretty, though. Maybe she thought if she looked rich enough behind the wheel, she could pass for your girlfriend. The humiliation struck like knives. Amara's breath caught, but she forced her body to stay still. She had learned long ago never to give people the satisfaction of seeing her break. But Damien wasn't done. He leaned back in his chair, eyes fixed on her like a predator testing its prey. She won't even explain herself. Too proud. Or too guilty. A silence followed, cruel and heavy. Every eye at the table waited for her reaction. Finally, Amara raised her gaze. Her amber eyes, fierce and wet with unspilled tears, locked onto Damien's. She didn't say a word. She didn't need to. Her silence screamed louder than anything she could have spoken. For the first time that evening, Damien looked away. The dinner dragged on. Amara cleared plates, refilled glasses, endured whispers and laughter that felt like stones hurled at her back. She wanted to vanish, to be anywhere else, but she couldn't. Malik needed her pay. She had no choice. Later, when the guests were gone and the penthouse quiet again, Damien found her in the laundry room, folding linen with methodical precision. You embarrassed me tonight, he said, his voice low, dangerous. Amara didn't look up. I didn't say a word. Exactly, Damien snapped, stepping closer. You stood there with that look, like you were above me, above all of us. Do you have any idea how that makes me look? Amara's hands stilled on the linen. Slowly, she lifted her head. You don't need me to make you look cruel, Mr. Cross. You do that all by yourself. The words slipped out before she could stop them. The room went still. Damien's breath hitched, sharp as glass. He stepped closer until there was barely space between them, his chest rising and falling, his storm-gray eyes flashing with something she couldn't read. Rage, yes, but something else beneath it. You think you're brave? He whispered. You think you can say things like that and walk away? Amara didn't flinch. She met his gaze head-on, her voice steady. No, I don't think I'm brave. I think I'm tired. Tired of being spoken to like I'm less than human. For a moment, silence wrapped around them, thick, electric. Damien's lips parted as if he'd speak, but no words came. Finally, he turned on his heel and stormed out, his footsteps echoing through the hall. Amara's knees threatened to give way, but she forced herself to stand tall, her heart hammering in her chest. She didn't know it yet, but her words had pierced through something Damien had spent years building around himself. And cracks in a fortress always spread. Do you know what happens to people who cross me? Damien's voice cut through the dimly lit garage, cold and jagged. His footsteps echoed off the concrete as he approached, his storm-gray eyes fixed on Amara. She stood frozen by the Ferrari, her fingers brushing the cool metal of the hood. The car gleamed like a predator in the shadows, its crimson body glowing under the fluorescent lights. This was the very machine she had risked everything to take. Her voice was steady, though her heart pounded. Yes, they end up ruined. Damien stopped in front of her, his presence overwhelming, his jaw tight. Then why? His tone cracked, not with anger this time, but with something deeper, raw. Why steal the one thing you knew I cared about most? Amara's throat tightened. The note still burned in her pocket. She had carried it for days now, waiting for the moment she could no longer keep silent, and now there was no choice. Wordlessly, she pulled it out, crumpled and worn from her constant touch, and held it toward him. Damien's eyes narrowed as he snatched it from her hand. He unfolded the paper, his gaze scanning the hastily written words. Red Ferrari, tamper with brakes. Tomorrow morning, Cross won't walk away this time. For a moment, the only sound was the hum of the overhead lights. Damien's grip tightened on the note. His lips parted, but no words came. Shock cracked through his face, though he tried to mask it. He looked at Amara, his voice lower now, almost disbelieving. "Where did you get this?" "I found it in the guard's jacket," Amara whispered. "The night before. I didn't think. I just acted. I thought if I drove the car, if I got it out of here before they could touch it." She stopped, shaking her head. "I was trying to protect you, and you hated me for it." Her voice cracked on the last word. Damien's chest rose and fell, uneven. He stared at her like he was seeing her for the first time, not as a maid, not as a nuisance, but as something infinitely more complex. "You risked prison," he muttered, almost to himself. "You risked everything." The silence stretched, thick with tension neither of them could name. Amara's hands trembled at her sides, but she forced herself to meet his gaze. "I didn't do it for thanks. I didn't do it because I liked you. I did it because it was right, because no one else would." For a man like Damien, used to loyalty bought with money, the words hit harder than bullets. He swallowed, his throat working. For the first time he couldn't summon fury. Instead, his voice cracked, soft, broken, "And I called you a thief in front of them all." Amara's chest ached. She wanted to tell him it didn't matter, that she was used to it, but the truth was, it had mattered. It had humiliated her, carved into her pride. Her eyes welled, but she blinked the tears back, standing tall. "Yes, you did." Something shifted in Damien's face. His anger, his arrogance, his pride, they all seemed to crumble brick by brick. He took a step closer, then another, until only inches separated them. His breath was uneven, his eyes wet with a shine she had never seen before. Before the staff, before his empire, before himself, Damien Cross bent. His tall frame folded forward and he sank to one knee on the cold concrete floor. The billionaire knelt before the maid he had scorned. Gasps filled the garage. Security guards, staff, even a driver had witnessed it. Damien's head bowed, his voice breaking. "I was wrong." Amara's breath hitched, her heart hammering in her chest. She had never imagined this moment, this man, ruthless and untouchable, on his knees before her. "I humiliated you. I doubted you. I don't deserve your forgiveness," Damien whispered, his voice thick. "But God help me, I'm asking for it." The garage fell silent, the weight of his words crashing over everyone present. Amara's lips trembled. For the first time, Damien Cross, the man who had treated her like dirt, who had broken her dignity, looked human, broken, vulnerable. She didn't speak. She couldn't. The war between them had reached its turning point, and neither of them would ever be the same again. The story of Damien Cross kneeling before his maid spread through the tower like wildfire. By morning, every member of staff, from the cooks to the drivers, whispered about it in hushed tones. A man who once ruled through fear had cracked open before their eyes, and nothing felt the same anymore. Amara tried to keep her routine, scrubbing, folding, polishing, but the air was different. People who had once smirked or whispered behind her back now looked at her with something else: respect, curiosity, even fear. But Amara herself wasn't celebrating. The memory of Damien on his knees haunted her, not because it gave her satisfaction, but because it unsettled her to her very core. She hadn't wanted his humiliation. She had only wanted him to see the truth. That evening, Damien summoned the entire staff to the Great Hall. The marble gleamed under golden chandeliers, the city skyline glowing behind the floor-to-ceiling windows. Everyone gathered, murmuring nervously. Amara lingered near the back, trying to make herself small. Damien entered in silence. He wore no suit tonight, only a simple black shirt with the sleeves rolled up. His face was pale, his jaw tight. He looked less like the untouchable billionaire and more like a man about to bear something raw. He stood before them, his storm-gray eyes sweeping the room. "Last night," he began, his voice carrying across the hall, "I accused someone in this house of a crime they did not commit. I humiliated her, I degraded her, and I was wrong." A ripple moved through the crowd. Damien's gaze found Amara in the back. He didn't look away. "Amara Daniels risked her life to protect mine. She saw a threat where my own men failed. She acted with courage that I did not deserve. And instead of gratitude, I gave her cruelty." The staff shifted uneasily, their whispers rising. No one had ever heard Damien Cross admit fault, let alone in public. He drew a sharp breath, forcing the words out. So hear me clearly. From this day forward, she is not to be spoken down to. She is not to be mocked. She is under my protection. Anyone who disrespects her disrespects me." Gasps broke out. Some staff bowed their heads, others exchanged wide-eyed glances. Amara felt heat rush to her face, her throat tightening. Protection from Damien Cross was both a shield and a prison. After dismissing the others, Damien crossed the room toward her. She held her ground, though every instinct screamed to step back. When they were alone, his voice softened. "I meant every word," Amara say. Arched his face, looking for mockery, for manipulation, but instead she found exhaustion, regret, maybe even fear. "You can't undo what you said," she whispered, her eyes wet. "You can't undo what you made me feel." Damien's lips parted, pained. "I know. But I can try to be better than the man I was yesterday." The words hit her harder than any insult ever had. For a moment, silence hung between them, thick with things unspoken. Finally, Amara shook her head, forcing her voice to steady. "You don't get to decide my forgiveness." "I do." Damien nodded, accepting her defiance without anger for once. "Then I'll wait." For the first time since she'd met him, he turned away, not in fury, but in patience. That night, Amara lay awake, staring at the ceiling of her tiny room in the servants' quarters. She replayed his words, his bowed head, his eyes stripped of armor. Against her will, her heart trembled. She had spent so long hating him, so long bracing herself against his cruelty, but now she wasn't sure if what she felt was hatred anymore, and that terrified her more than anything. The days that followed were unlike anything Amara had ever known inside Damien Cross's house. Gone were the mocking whispers from the other maids. Gone was the butler's cold indifference. Where once she'd walked halls heavy with disdain, now heads dipped respectfully when she passed. Some smiled. A few even murmured Miss Daniels instead of just Maid. It unsettled her. Respect won on borrowed power didn't feel like respect at all. Damien, however, was changing. Slowly, unevenly, like a man learning to breathe air after living under water. He no longer barked orders when Amara entered a room. He asked. He no longer looked through her as though she were invisible. He looked at her. His storm-gray eyes lingered, searching, softening in ways that confused them both. One evening, Amara found him alone in the study, slumped in a leather chair, a tumbler of whiskey untouched at his side. His tie hung loose, the top buttons of his shirt undone. For once, he didn't look like a billionaire. He looked like a man. "You've been avoiding me," Damien said quietly, not lifting his eyes from the window where the city burned in neon. Amara stood by the door, clutching the tray she had brought. "I've been working." His lips curved into the faintest smile. "You always have an answer." Finally he turned, meeting her gaze. "Why aren't you afraid of me anymore?" Her breath caught. The truth rose before she could stop it. "Because I've already seen you on your knees." The words hung between them, sharp and tender all at once. Damien's jaw tightened, but instead of anger, something else flickered across his face. Shame, then something rawer. He set the glass aside and stood, slowly, carefully, as if approaching a wild creature he didn't want to scare away. "Amara," his voice trembled. "I don't know how to undo the things I've done to you, but I know this. I don't want to be that man anymore, not with you." Her chest ached. She wanted to believe him. She wanted to let herself fall into the softness that peeked through his cracks. But her memories burned. The laughter of his dinner guests, his voice calling her a thief, the humiliation pressed like salt into open wounds. "People don't change overnight," she whispered. "No," Damien agreed, stepping closer. "But sometimes it takes one person to make them want to try." His nearness sent heat through her veins, frightening in its intensity. She had hated him. She had feared him. And now her heart betrayed her, quickening when his hand brushed hers. Amara pulled back, eyes shining. "You don't get to use me as your redemption." Damien's voice broke. "Then let me love you instead." Silence crashed between them. Her pulse thundered, her body trembled. For a moment she saw not the billionaire, not the tyrant, but the man. Only, cracked, desperate for something real. "I don't trust you," she whispered, though her voice was softer now. Damien bowed his head, his golden hair falling forward. "Then I'll earn it, even if it takes a lifetime." the words rooted deep inside her, where fear and longing warred. And for the first time, Amara wondered if the walls around her heart were not as unbreakable as she had believed. The autumn air carried a chill through the open balcony doors of Damien's penthouse. The city stretched out in lights below, alive and restless, but inside, the world had quieted. Amara stood near the glass railing, the night wind tugging at her simple cotton dress. She had been offered silks, diamonds, all the trappings of Damien's wealth, but she'd refused them. She wanted no illusions. If she stayed, it would be for him, not the glitter that surrounded him. Behind her, Damien approached slowly, his hands buried in his pockets, his steps uncharacteristically hesitant. He had been different these past weeks, softer. He spent less time at the office, more time with her brother in the hospital, quietly paying for treatments without announcing it to anyone. He no longer shouted at staff, no longer filled rooms with fear. But tonight, something deeper weighed in his storm-gray eyes. "Amara," he said softly, his voice carrying across the quiet. She turned, her amber-brown eyes catching the city's glow. "You look nervous." His lips curved into a humorless smile. "That's because I am." Damien stepped closer until only the night air separated them. "I've spent years thinking I was untouchable, that money, power, control, they were all I needed. But then you—" His voice cracked. He steadied himself. "You risked everything for me. You made me see myself for what I was, and you made me want to be more." Amara's breath trembled, but she didn't look away. "And if tomorrow you wake up angry again? If you go back to the man you were?" Damien shook his head, his eyes burned with something something naked. "I can't, because now I know what it feels like to lose your respect, to lose you. And that's a pain I can't survive twice." Her heart ached at the rawness in his tone. She had never thought she would hear Damien Cross beg, not with money, not with power, but with his soul. He took her hand gently, no force, no demand, just a question in his touch. "Stay, not as my maid, not as my possession, but as my equal, as the woman who owns the only part of me I never gave to anyone, my heart." Tears welled in her eyes. For so long she had dreamed of dignity, of being seen, never of this, of being loved by the very man who had once tried to break her. And yet, her heart, stubborn and strong, now beat in rhythm with his. Amara let out a shaky laugh through her tears. "You don't make things simple, Damien." He smiled faintly, his thumb brushing her knuckles. "Neither do you." Silence wrapped around them, soft and tender. Then slowly, Amara stepped forward, closing the last space between them. Damien's arms encircled her, tentative at first, then desperate, as though he'd been starving for her touch. She rested her forehead against his chest, listening to the thunder of his heart. For the first time, she felt safe. Not because he was powerful, but because he was hers. Months later, the city would gossip. Whispers would flutter about the ruthless billionaire who had fallen for his maid. Some would mock, some would envy, but neither Damien nor Amara cared. Because in the quiet of their home, when she laughed and his gray eyes softened, when his hands cradled her growing belly with reverence and awe, the world outside ceased to matter. Their story had begun with fury, humiliation, and fire. But it ended here, with love, redemption, and a promise sealed not in marble halls or flashing cameras, but in the steady beat of two hearts that had finally, against the all odds, found each other.